yeah, so this is a hand from the Super Tuesday final table between C. Darwin, pretty much the GOAT, and Wild Ace Hun, who is also a big winner. And you can see 3 stacks around 26, 27 big blinds. Both C. Darwin and Wild Ace Hun have 55 big blinds. This guy's got around the same, and this guy's the chip leader. So at 50 big blinds, button v big blind, C. Darwin still has like jacks and ace queen most of the time, if not all the time. So still has a pretty strong range. Yeah, I'll quickly show the ranges. But so this is the big blind range. Like, still has good hands, and this is the imposition range. And because of that, the equities are pretty close, 52%. Its imposition has a range advantage, 52, but it's very modest to the point where it's negligible range advantage, really. And firstly, I ran this hand in ICM to 0.5 in Piosolver, and then I saw some interesting things, and I thought, I'm gonna have to run this more. I have to run this further down, more accurately. So I ran it to 0.2, and then I ran exactly the same thing to 0.2 in Chibi V, just to compare, or solve for ICM. You could say the only difference is ICM existing or not existing, and yeah, some interesting things happen. But I'll just play the hand. So check flop seems fine. So he instantly announces that he's not range betting. So when I ran the sim, I was like, okay, I'm going to test for small bet, big bet, and check. Wild Ace Hun turns the straight, and you think, okay, basically a stat, kind of easy bet, whatever you want to say. He bets small. C. Darwin, I don't think can ever fold his hand. Interesting river. And he goes check, Wild Ace Hun scoops with a straight, so I ran it. And, well, the first thing of interest was, okay, so there's ICM, there's no big betting. No big betting at all. And just to compare, you might think, oh, okay, maybe it's just not a board for big betting. But interestingly enough, in Chibi V, it's the opposite. There's no small betting, it's only big betting. So that's one interesting thing. And the only difference is ICM. The range is the same. So ICM constrains flop bet sizes here at 50 big blinds. And he goes check, and the turn is the jack of spades. You can see that C. Darwin's hand is kind of indifferent. Or it is indifferent between small bet and check. And he checks. And then this is where things get interesting. Like, well, straight, that's going to bet every time, right? But it doesn't. And in fact, 10-7 of diamonds is almost always checking. It is indifferent. It does appear to be indifferent. I ran it to 0.5 and it was a pure check. I've run it to 0.2 and it's indifferent. At the moment, it's not really clear to me whether it's going to be a pure check or indifferent, but what's clear to me is it's certainly not a pure bet. I mean, some things are a pure bet. Queen Jack with no spades is a pure bet. That makes more money betting. This makes more money betting. But I think if you asked a lot of people, does 10-7 make more money betting or checking? Some people would say, oh, it's indifferent, the cop-out answer, but most people would just say betting. But it doesn't. So I don't know if you have any ideas where you think that might be. I would have bet big with that hand on the turn. Yeah, Well, I think that's good that you've said that, because there's hardly any small betting here. I also think that's interesting, and that's something I need to look at more. But if we look at chip EV and we take the same line, we can see it's even cleaner, where there's just no small betting. And this kind of tells me that, there's two things I want to do, because one is do some node locking on the flop, but the second thing is this: there's no small betting here on the turn, and a lot of people will be tempted to small bet kind of some medium strength hands. I believe a lot of people will be tempted to bet a hand like maybe 10-8 suited or ace-8 or something, which are pure checks. And I think the things happening here that make that not the play is that now you're on the turn. You've only got 2 streets left. It's now a 2-street game. No money's gone in. It's now a 2-street game. So it seems to me that you either want to start putting money in, and a lot of money in, with good hands, or you want to start putting a lot of money in with bluffs, or you want to check the middle of your range. The other thing where I don't think blocking is particularly useful here is the board's going to change so much, right? Like, you can bet ace-8 and you can get value from, a worse 8, but I mean, you block that. You can get value from, say, ace-2 with the ace of spades, but getting value from something doesn't mean that you've maximized your EV. It just means a worse hand is called because it's got the correct price to call. You haven't exploited the opponent by getting called by a worse hand. That's not how. Getting called by a worse hand doesn't mean you've exploited someone. It means you've won chips on a particular street, but it doesn't mean you've outplayed them or played the hand better than them or anything. So I think the idea here is that it's now a 2-street game. You've got a wide variety of hands. You've got some nutted hands, you've got some air type hands, and you've got hands in the middle. So I think the idea is you need to now start piling money in with your good hands, because that's how you get paid. Then you start piling money in with your weak hands and you check the middle. And the interesting thing about 10-7 is that you think it's like a nutted hand, close to a nutted hand, that you would just want to bet. Now the other interesting thing is, and I'm glad I did this, is that in chip EV it basically is a pure bet. And it's only checking when it actually has the flush as well. So 10-7 diamonds is now a pure bet in chip EV. And the 10-7 of spades is mixing. And I think this is happening because flushes will check back the turn. Not really as traps. In chip EV I would say never as traps. I'm going to say not really as traps. The reason they're checking is because they simply block too much. So value bets bet, not just because they are good hands, but hands bet when it makes money by betting, which basically means you have a certain hand, and when you bet, lots of worse hands call you. Now obviously lots of worse hands can call you when you've got 9-7 of spades, like you've got a flush, right? The only problem is that you have 2 spades, which means it's less likely he's going to call with, say, well, he can't call you with ace of hearts, 7 of spades, because you've got the 7 of spades. He can't call you with ace of hearts, 9 of spades, because you've got that. But he also can't call you with say, king 9 of diamonds, or say king 9 of hearts, king 9 of clubs, because you've got a 9. So you see that the flushes that also have a pair are checking a lot, and the flushes that also block the straights, so the queen and the 10, like queen 10 being the nut straight. So if you've got a flush that contains a 10, flush that contains a queen, flush that contains a 9, does quite a lot of checking, I think, for those reasons. These are kind of interesting to me because in a way it looks like all the flushes are checking sometimes, but I think that these are checking quite a bit more than the other ones. Like you see these nut flushes, the ace 3, these are just never checking. The reasons these are checking are, I think, because of the queen. Again, they just block too much. These ones, I'm not too exactly sure, but I feel like I know why these are checking sometimes. So they're checking in chip EV for those reasons. But with ICM, well, the similar kind of thing happens. Like the 9 high flushes are doing a lot of checking because, again, the same reason. That was 7 blocks to 7-10, so I mean I think this is relevant and kind of interesting now that these flushes are actually always betting. So I need to think about that a little bit more. But these 10-7 in ICM this is why I think it's so interesting. 10-7 without the spades is doing lots of checking here. And what we said about if you've got 10-7 of spades, he can't call you with, say, ace of hearts, 7 of spades, or anything like that. 7 of spades, ace of hearts, or, well, nut flushes, can't call you with nut flushes, even though you wouldn't want that. But basically, yeah, I'm not explaining this well now, but if the hypothesis is sometimes when nutted hands block so much they start checking, then you would expect to see 10-7 of spades checking more than 10-7 of diamonds. That is what you see in chip EV. That is what you see, and I think that's why. I do think that's why. But this is why it's interesting to me, because it's not the case here. So 10-7 obviously still blocks lots of stuff because it's a straight. So it obviously blocks, 9-10, 8-10, 10-2 suited, Jack-10. Blocks those worse hands they're going to call. But it doesn't block any of the spade stuff. And you'd still go big, so you would still get a decent amount of chips for it. I say you'd still go big. You think you could because most of the betting is big, but it doesn't seem to want to here. So this hand's kind of really interesting to me. I'm not too sure why. The only thing I've got at the moment is that in the check node in ICM and in the check to the river node, the big blind will actually bluff more. So you could say, well, the big blind will bluff more. I'll show you what I mean. Let's just break it off. The big blind, it will bluff more, and he'll bluff more for a double pot, and he will actually double pot more. So this is actually more aggressive now from the big blind in chip EV, and he'll be forced to just make some of these horrible calls. And it also looks like that your pure calls are basically coming from rivered set. Okay, surprise, surprise. 2 pair, which you... Sorry, not 2 pair. 9-10, which isn't 2 pair. 1 pair straight blocker. And then your pure calls are basically Queen 10, which is again... I should be talking about Queen 10 at the same time I talk about 7, but it's just 10-7 and Queen 10. And... yeah, this is kind of the interesting thing here. Big blind does get to bluff a bit more. So I'm not convinced that's the reason, but it might be. It could be the case. See, Pio kind of knows what's going on at all times. Like, it does know on the turn that it's going to be facing certain things on rivers, which is pretty cool. So Pio's going to know in ICM, if you tell it on the turn, right, we're now going to be facing X amount of aggression or X amount of bluffing on the river. So it is going to adjust its strategy to try and maximize against that. So I guess the way it would do that, I'm just kind of thinking out loud basically, is it's going to find a couple of hands on the turn that do a good job of calling a bunch of rivers. Do a really good job of calling a bunch of rivers that don't necessarily do amazing going bet. Now, I mean, one kind of hand that I can think might be good for that would be Ace-Jack. So I'm kind of wondering, could it just start taking hands like Ace-Jack and Aces and checking twice? Does it need to take 10-7 of diamonds? How's it going, Urk? Yo just jumped in his side. What spot are we looking at? Pretty interesting spot. I'll show you. This is from Cali Poker YouTube channel. He doesn't mind me showing these. But this is from the final table of Super Tuesday. I'll speed this up. 50 big blinds effective. Check flop. You can see the stack sizes, but basically they're two big stacks, 50 bigs, and there's there isn't any short stacks, but there are definitely 3 stacks like 26 big blinds. And then turn goes check, seems reasonable. And then the button bets. Small. See, Darwin has a hand that I just don't think can fold. River's kind of interesting, but river goes check. So what was interesting to me when... Well, I ran this because I actually... The reason I ran this in the first place because I thought the flop was interesting. So just to start from the flop... In position can only bet small or check. In Chippy V, in position can only bet big or check. So already we're interesting. That's the reason I ran it, because he checked back. So I was like, okay, you're checking back against your Darwin. That basically tells me that you're not betting range. If you're not betting range, we're going to have to solve for different sizes potentially. So I just tested for third and 2/3. And we get really clean solution. I mean, this is as clean as you can get. I ran this really far, really accurately. No big betting in ICM, no small betting in Chippy V. And then it goes check. And then we get the jack on the turn. And now you get no small betting, which I think is because it's now a 2-street game. You've got 2 streets left. You've got a wide variety of hands. Your strong hands want to get lots of money in, so they want to bet big. So your weak hands are going to try and get folds, so they're going to want to bet big. Your medium hands are going to check back, and that's basically what you see very frequently. That's pretty standard. And that appears to be what's happening here. But 10-7 is kind of interesting, because I saw this and I was like, okay. First of all, there's like hardly any small betting. So when I saw Wild Ace Hun bet small, I thought, I'm not sure. Seems like maybe big betting. If we look at all turns, we'll get an idea. So yeah, small betting is definitely present. It's pretty much the only strategy you can use on a 9 or 8 or a 9. And I guess on some kind of completers, a flush, you could use it. If the board pairs 2, 8 or 9, it's frequent. It's the only one you can use on an 8 or 9. And then if there's something completing that gives a pretty clear straight advantage, like a 5 or a 6, you can use it. But in some of these, these overcards, most of it is big betting. So I saw the small bet and thought, well, I'm not sure. It seems like, if you're going to get 2 streets, you might as well start going big. And I guess the one hand that's most similar to 10-7 in terms of hand type is Queen 10. And we see a really interesting thing from Queen 10. We see all combinations of Queen 10 are completely indifferent. Or at least indifferent between checking and betting. Some sizes are getting mixed, but there's not much betting from Queen 10. Yeah, the small bet on the turn, pairing and big, and all the others is pretty common in Chippy V as well, to my knowledge. We'll have a quick look at Chippy V here. So this is chippy V now, and we'll do the same thing. So yeah, in chippy V, there's just like way less small betting, which makes sense, right? We basically see small betting on the 8 and the 9 and the 2, and everything else is basically big. So that's cool. That's like a nice thing. We see it's like pretty easy to navigate, I think. You can't go too big on the 8, 9 or 2, which again makes sense because I think it makes sense. I think that's relatively obvious that the big blind can have like tons of strong hands, and you know, if you nail your 9x hands, your 8x hands, your 2x hands, then you're quite often going to be betting. So that makes sense. So in chippy V, it is mainly big betting, apart from on those board pairings. ICM, there's definitely more room for the small bet. So his small bet with his hand is now a lot more reasonable, I think. And you could come to the conclusion he's just betting. Like, you could come to the conclusion that on this turn he's kind of gone, okay, ICM, pretty dynamic board, I'm not going to use a big size. But the interesting thing is here is we can actually clearly see, and this is really clear, there is a ton of hands that absolutely definitely want to bet big, even with ICM. And these types of hands are all the same. First of all, there's a couple of complete, you know, no equity hands basically, like complete 5 high, no draw, no nothing. But the other hands that definitely want to bet are basically top pairs that have very questionable additional equity. So basically hands that aren't going to check back and benefit from another spade rolling off. Those kind of things. So, you know, Queen Jack of Hearts, that's fine if a 10 of diamonds, spades or clubs rolls off, that makes a straight. But any spades, not too happy. So there's a ton of hands that essentially really want to get one street of big value now, potentially more later, but most of these hands are just going to bet big once now. And kind of, I guess, kind of use the fact that check raising just doesn't check raising doesn't happen too much, and it doesn't happen too much in the chippy V as well when you use the big size. But as far as I can see, there's two kind of big anomalies here, which is kind of the 10-7 Queen 10. Now it's definitely the case where there are some value hands that just block so like way too much that they make more money checking because they essentially block all of the worse hands that call. So it kind of makes sense. Those kind of hands are, you know, 10. Well, those kind of hands would be Queen 10 of spades. Like, it just blocks the worst flushes. It blocks all the straights. It blocks a bunch of the 9, 10, 8, 10, Queen Jack, Queen 8, Queen 9. Blocks everything. So it's perfectly happy checking. But then when we look at Queen 10 of diamonds or 10-7 of diamonds, these straights that don't have the spades, that is what is interesting to me, because it's not. It seems now perfectly reasonable to use those straight hands that have like 85% equity to just bet big, and seems very reasonable you can get two streets even with ICM. Well, let's see if you do choose to bet big with, say, Queen 10 with no spade, because Queen 10 will never bet big on the turn with a spade. And this is interesting to me, and maybe that's a good clue that maybe just having the spade once again does block too much as soon as you start sizing up. So if you size up here, how much of the calling range contains a spade? I guess a decent amount. These are no spade hands. These are no spade hands. How many combos are here? Potentially not that many. As if you look at all the spade combos, there's a lot more combinations, it seems now. So there is that idea, that possibility. I think that's a strong possibility. But let's kind of test it by going, okay, Queen 10, no spade. Can you get two big streets? Brick it off. I mean, yeah, you can get two big streets, but then maybe it's the case if you can get two big streets on kind of bricks. I guess if it pairs the board, you can. Now it doesn't really want you to go too big. So let's try and work backwards. Try and work backwards. The mystery is still these 10-7. The straights without the flush cards. They're the kind of mysterious ones. And it's happening in Chippy V2, which again is a mystery. I should be able to work this out if I think about this long enough. Yeah, it is surprising, isn't it, Eric? So this is Chippy V now. So Chippy V in position is more just going, like most of the time it's just, well, firstly the value bet thresholds are lower because it's Chippy V. There's no kind of ICM tax. So Queen 10, even without a spade, rocking 90% equity, it's so happy basically stacking off in a way. I say so happy, I mean if it does get check raised on the turn it's not going to jam, but I mean it's just not really going to fold at any point, I don't think. Maybe it kind of will. Maybe this is the point. Maybe it kind of will. Maybe that's the point. How much of an overbet is that though on the river? It's not even overbet. So maybe that's the point. Queen 10 of, even Queen 10 with a spade is sometimes folding to that crazy line. But yeah, this again, it's not consistent to me because now 10-7 without the spade is a pure bet. So this isn't consistent. This is so confusing. We know that value, when it blocks too much, will sometimes choose to check. This is Chippy V, and we can see it's doing that. It's certainly doing it with Queen, all combinations of Queen 10, apart from the ones with the 10 of spades, which is near enough, essentially. I think you can just call that all combos. Queen 10 off, with or without a spade, is indifferent. Which I think sort of proves that in Chippy V2, blocking everything as a value hand is unfortunately a bit of a problem for value betting. Bit of a problem. So it does check. Now pretty much the most similar to hand to Queen 10 off is say 10-7 of diamonds, right? But that's pure betting. The 10. Well, I suppose the difference between these two hands is that Queen 10 has the ultimate blockers, and 10-7 of diamonds does block a lot with the 10. But I guess the 7 is just not as beefy as a blocker as the Queen. So maybe it's that. Maybe it's the difference between the 7 and the Queen is doing all the damage here. Yeah, 9-8-2 spade. Yeah, that's right. So maybe that's what's going on here. Maybe 10-7 of spades in Chippy V, blocking everything, indifferent. Queen 10 off in Chippy V, blocking everything, indifferent, despite being the effective nuts. 10-7 of diamonds is blocking a lot, but certainly blocking less, right? Like, certainly blocking less. In fact, Queen 10 of diamonds isn't in the range. There we go. That's the better. We can now compare. Yeah. Okay. This is making sense now. So Queen 10 of clubs is blocking about the same as Queen 10 no spade, and they're both indifferent. Yeah. Okay. So that makes sense. So the Queen's just a more beefy blocker because you're blocking more of these, right? The Queen 10s that never fold. Queen Jacks. queen 8s, queen 9s, they never fold. So it now makes sense that the chippy V 10-7 is just pure big bet. That makes sense. Pure big bet. Pure big bet. And some of these value that just block an awful lot, it's just all over it. Even though they don't have a spade, but they're kind of indifferent, which is why we can see these queen 10. And you'll see the queen 10 of spades, if you've ever got it, is a pure check. It just blocks everything. So okay, that makes sense. So we're chippy V, I think we're okay. Kind of okay, chippy V, kind of. Now we look at the ICM, and we're trying to think about things the same. So we look at queen 10 and we're like, yeah, it's a really strong hand, like 90% equity, kind of blocks a bit of everything. There's a lot of checking. It's indifferent. It's a really strong hand. It's like 90% equity. Really strong hand, but tons of checking. Let's look at queen 10 suited. Same thing, really strong hand. Tons of checking. But the one that bets the most is actually the one that does the super hard block with the queen 10 of spades. And then if we look at 10-7 suited, 10-7 suited blocks, well, 10-7 of diamonds is, out of all of those hands, the value hand that blocks the least, which you might think, based on previous logic, is the one that's going to bet the most. So this is still kind of interesting. Now what I'll say here is that I think what ICM does, what I've seen so far when I have compared ICM and chippy V, is it does seem to follow a more hot and cold betting strategy. What I mean by that is in chippy V, let's look at queen 10 suited this time. Queen 10 suited that isn't a flush is kind of indifferent. But queen 10 of spades, despite being kind of the super nuts, really, it actually just checks because it just blocks too much to bet. So you've basically got a higher equity hand, pure checking, in chippy V. In ICM, I think what happens is that it skews the higher equity hands to be more willing to bet. I think that generally does happen. So you now have the higher equity hand, despite blocking more powerfully, is betting more. I think that is what is going on with queen 10. So I'm going to go ahead and it kind of extrapolates that and go, I think that is what is going on here. I think. And then kind of what's going on. I think that's what's going on here. It's easy to get confused when you go ahead and you look at hands like queen jack of hearts, just like pure betting. But again, I think that's that's got something different going on where that's really a one street hand looking to get one big bet now, as opposed to a two street hand that wants two streets but it just blocks too much. So I think that's about as conclusive as I can get at the moment as to why you get hands like 10-7 pure checking back in ICM but pure betting in chippy V. I think that the blocker effects are what's the word? I'm not even sure if it's the blocker effects anymore. The 10's clearly a blocker to worse hands calling. I mean, so that counts for something. But I think normally it would just, we've seen in chippy V. It's interesting. Chippy V is fine. The ICM does tend to skew higher equity hands towards betting. I can show you another example of that in a second. Irk says, I have a 9-8-3-3 chippy V sim button V big blind 60 deep where pretty much never checks in this spot. Yeah. Okay, but it kind of does here. Yeah, I mean potentially one of us has just run it to a more detailed. Like I ran it to 0.2. I don't know how far down you run it. Maybe you ran it more detailed and we're just looking at kind of scuffed, inaccurate results. But 0.2 is pretty far down. But maybe you can tell me kind of what setting you've got here. So yeah, ICM appears to skew quite often towards betting high equity hands. I'll show you that example now. In this line, if we then bet big, let's look at the check raise strategy in ICM from out of position. He's going to check raise when he's got nut flushes and bluffs. So in ICM, he check raises nut flushes and bluffs. In Chibi V, in exactly the same spot, he check raises medium flushes and bluffs. So he's going for a bit more for, I guess you kind of say protection, getting the money in now with slightly worse flushes, because. But yeah, that's what I mean. It just skews towards putting money in with more hod and cod. That's it really. I think this is a pretty cool. Okay, so you ran it basically the same, 0.33. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, interesting. Probably it's just not run down enough. Probably it's just not run down enough. But I still think it's interesting because, you know, most of the time you look at a sim, you've got hands that hit a certain equity threshold, like, you know, I mean 80. I mean no money's gone in so far, and what's Jack 9? What's Jack 9 doing, Chibi? Let's have a look. Yeah, okay. But yeah, normally you'd see certain types of hands that are just very frequent betting, and then like I said, sometimes you will see. You know, for instance, let's say we bet flop, and then king of spades on the turn. Like this is pretty kind of standard where you will see some kind of nut flushes checking back the turn simply because they just block too much the continuing range. Like the continuing range is just like revolving around the ace of spades, you know, and other spades. So when you have the ace of spades and another spade, there's some checking here because you block a lot. But generally speaking, if you turn a flush and you got a flush, it's, you know, a lot of betting. But we can compare quickly what, you know, kind of another common pattern is that, again, when you just block kind of everything as a reason to check. So flushes with a pair. So if you've got a spade, if you've got the flush, but then you also block the 9, which is the only card that isn't a spade, then you've got pure checks. So you will kind of get used to seeing these patterns, right, of sometimes strong hands check back. But to me this was a little bit different. This was like no money's gone in. It's a straight that doesn't block any flush continuation. And sure, I understand a straight loses to a flush, but still you've still got all the one paid. You've got all of the, you know, an awful lot of one spade hands that are going to continue. Like there isn't an ace of spades that folds the turn, right? There isn't an ace of spades that folds the turn when you bet big here. But it doesn't even want you to bet big, so I guess that's an example of what I was saying a while ago, where just because you get called by worse, it doesn't mean you've played the hand better, or, you know, betting and getting called by worse doesn't mean you've played the hand correctly. It just means that a worse hand had the correct price to continue. So that's why you've got to look in more detail about why hands are betting, and the fact that this 10-7 of diamonds is showing up in as almost, you know, the pure checks almost, and Queen 10 is showing up with pure checks, whereas in Chippy V, okay, Queen 10 does some checking, but you've got the 10-7. That's the big difference, right? You've got basically pure bet Chippy V, which makes sense, and then you've got like almost a pure check, which this is the one that doesn't make that much sense. So this hand has just been like crazy interesting to me. Yeah. I've probably looked at this hand like 3 hours, 4 hours. I looked at it on Friday. It's very interesting. Yeah, what do you think, Irk? It is one to crack. Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's an interesting one. It's kind of like that one hand in the grid that just doesn't seem to make much sense. Yeah. The one hand that doesn't seem to make much sense. I mean, everything else just makes sense. Yeah. Oh, the other thing that I don't think I mentioned to you is in ICM when it does go check. I'll show you when it goes check out of position. He will double pot more, and he'll double pot bluff more. So this is ICM, and he's double potting 4% of the time. And this is chip EV. Let me just show you. This is chip EV, and he's double potting like 2% of the time. And I don't mean that 4% is more than 2. I actually mean that if you go into the Range Explorer for this and do this, Range Explorer, click on the double pot, and then click on this. So he's got 15 combos of bets, 6.7 of bluffs. That's like 43% or something, 45%. So he's bluffing like 45% of the time. And if you do the same thing in chip EV and click double pot and then go down, he's bluffing the original equilibrium amount based on pot size, which is 40%. So he's bluffing 40% here, and ICM is bluffing 43. So he's double potting twice as often, and on top of that, he's bluffing more frequently. So pretty much my last guess available to me, my last roll of the dice as to why 10-7 and Queen 10 without spades love checking so much is once you realise that ICM skews to betting higher equity hands. So normally Queen 10 of spades would be like, yeah, let's just check this because we block everything. But it's ICM, so he's just going, okay, my hand's just so good, betting is just now beneficial. It's just making more money than it would do in chip EV because there's the ICM factor. But now because of the ICM factor, you would say that the lack of spades, it goes more hot and cold with the betting strategy. So the non-spade version of the straight is slightly lower equity hand, so it's slightly less likely to bet when comparing to chip EV. And then once you consider that we're going to be facing some more double pots, maybe it's using those hands. Maybe it's using those hands to fall back on like calling, basically. Now, that doesn't completely sit with me at the moment because I mean most of the range is just indifferent calling, so I don't see why it would just play its range normally and just say, we're just going to have to call a certain amount of stuff and then just keep calling these hands like the right frequency. But maybe just maybe that there are a couple of hands that change more significantly between hot and cold value betting in Chippy V and ICM, and maybe sometimes it's those hands that would normally have bet but now check because they're slightly worse, and maybe they can benefit from basically trapping against an over bluffing ICM range. I'm not 100%, it's just a hypothesis, I'm not 100%, but it's like possible. Because there's a small ICM tax for button to call, so big blind is allowed to bluff more. Yep, exactly. It is allowed to bluff more. But yeah, the reason it doesn't completely sit right with me is because, like, let's just say that 10-7's not in the range. Does it matter? It's just gonna call slightly more Jack-9. It's just gonna call slightly more Ace-Jack. Does it matter? Maybe it all adds up. Maybe it's just got to think of it as the big picture. And maybe when you take into account that take into account everything, basically. Maybe we just take into account absolutely everything. Maybe that's the reason. Maybe there isn't just one reason. Maybe it's just all of those little reasons added up that 10-7 with ICM just ends up being, by definition, it's not a pure bet, it's not a pure check. By definition, it's just indifferent. It clearly is going to make good money checking, it's clearly going to make good money betting. Whereas in Chippy V, with some more normal frequencies and the fact that 10-7 of diamonds, clubs, hearts doesn't actually block that much, just like Queen 10 of hearts, clubs don't actually. No, those hands don't block that much. These hands block a little bit more. They're still kind of happy betting. So maybe it is that. Maybe it is that. So I'm kind of like I'm between 80 and 90% happy with that now, I would say. Seems weird that would be the reason. Hearing the reverse two, we kind of want a spade anyway, right? Well, let's look at the bluff range. I'm not sure we need a spade at all. Range Explorer, double pot. We really just want a queen or a 10, spade or no spade. We just want a queen or a 10, really, or a queen 10 or a 7. And maybe that's literally it. I saw this the first time. The interesting thing is that if you look at the bluffs, that they really do contain a 10. So I saw this and was like, why the fuck would we just use 10-7 as our double pot bluff catcher when most of the bluffs contain a 10? But now I've looked at the whole picture and seen that the value is basically exclusively a straight. Now it's starting to make sense that the bluffs now it's starting to make sense that the value is basically exclusively a straight. So if you do have 10-7, then you got it. No, that's not true. That's not true. Let's do that again. Let's do that one more time. The value, the value is flushes plus straights. So having the 10 is still really good. So yeah, having a spade is going to be useful, but he's going to be double potting with some non-spade straights. So yeah. Well, at that point, the bottom straight's just super high equity hand, right? 10-7 off, out of position. I mean, at that point, 10-7 no spades, the best hand 96% of the time. Seems perfectly good enough to value bet to me, even for double pot. It's just a very, very good hand. Let's look at the chip EV, same spot. Let's look at the same spot, what chip EV is doing with the double pot. Wow. Oh, now this is good. This is good. He's bluffing and value betting differently. He's bluffing and value betting completely differently. He's not double potting straights anymore. He's not double potting straights anymore, and because he's not double potting straights, he's also not bluffing with the 10. He's also not bluffing with like Queen 5 or 10-5. He's now just bluffing with chip EV bluffs. He's bluffing with the bottom of his range. He's bluffing with 5 high. So now this actually makes a shit ton more sense to me. In this line in ICM, we're picking up a higher proportion of bluffs that have a 10 or a 7, and also they're the main value hands, right? I mean, there's a tiny bits of flushes, but it's basically, yeah. In ICM, we're going to see a few more double pots, and they're going to be straights and flushes and bluffs with a 10 or a 7. In chip EV, we're going to see that double pot less often, but when we do see it, never bluffing with a 10 or a 7 or a queen. So using those hands to call is completely pointless. Bluffs are just going to contain a 5 or a 4, and it's simple as that. Bluffing with a 5 or a 4, and then the value is just going to be these spades that contain a 3. Oh, that makes a hell of a lot more sense now. That makes a hell of a lot more sense, right? That does kind of make sense, doesn't it? That does make sense. Does make sense. You're going to get a few more bluffs, and when you do get bluffs, your hand is kind of the nuts with 10-7. Queen 10. It's like, yeah, okay, they have a flush like 10%, 20% of the time, but yeah, if you have 10-7 or Queen 10, they're going to bluff a bit more, and then your hand is kind of the nuts. In chip EV, they're hardly ever going to double pot, and when they do, yeah, you're not blocking value anymore with your Queen 10, because their value is just flushes. Yeah. So you said you need a spade to call. This is the chip EV. You need a spade to call the double pot. I'm going to say in chip EV, yeah, you do. You're right. Actually, let's first look at this. Range Explorer, double pot. That's no spades. That's the spades. That's overall. Double pot. Yeah, it's just flushes and then like a bit of 5-4. So I think you're right. On chip EV, you do want a spade to call. Let's check. Here's the calling with a spade. Oh, actually, you get to jam now if you actually get there with a flush. You get to actually jam all of your flushes, even your 5-4 flush. You get to jam versus an overbet. Once again, that's the value bet thresholds being just so much lower, because obviously you couldn't do this in a final table. This would just be calls. But the easiest way is just to see no spade. Well, it will make some calls that aren't a spade. But if you look at the offsuit hands that contain a spade, yeah, it's more likely to call it a spade, right? So I think this kind of makes sense. It's taken me like 4 hours of talking out loud about this, but I think we finally got there, ARK. Now the river strategy is based on what hands in position checks on the turn, right? Not the other way around. So if we would be betting Queen 10 on the turn, out of position would never bluff those on the river. Let me read that again. But now that river strategy is based on what hand's imposition checks on the turn, right? Not the other way around. You're talking about this strategy being based on what happens here, I guess? That's what you mean, right? This strategy being based on what happens here. So, as in, Chippy V knows that imposition can't ever have 10-7, so it doesn't try and block having 10-7. It just tries to block the call range. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's what you mean. Yeah. Yeah, that is true. So it's not trying to block 10-7. But I think it all happens at the same time. I think it all happens at the same time. I don't think kind of one happens after the other. I think it just solves it as a thing. I think it all just... I don't think we can explain the turn strategy based on what happens on the river. I think you can. Because I think it gets solved simultaneously, but the solver still knows that the hand happens chronologically. So the solver still knows that the river... It still knows that what it does on the river is based on what happens on the turn. But I don't think it picks one range and then tries to solve the other one, or the other way around. I think it just picks them and just infinitely just says, right, find me the equilibrium for both. Just play the best you can against the other one and just does it in infinite like that, I think. It just tries to find an equilibrium rather than give me the best response. What I don't think it does is say, okay, player A, give me the best response to player B. Don't think it does that. I think it just says, play the best you can against the other person. And it kind of happens at the same time, I think. So I think that still is logical to explain a bit of the 10-7. As in, 10-7 now likes betting the turn in Chippy V, which you could call like the kind of original sim or the original hand. So the Chippy V, it's just going to bet 10-7 because betting is slightly less hot-cold than ICM. So yeah, 10-7 of diamonds is lower equity than 10-7 of spades, but that means it doesn't block as much as the continue range, and it's still like an 88% equity hand. So it's just going to bet because it's a really good hand and it doesn't block everything. And at the same time, the solver's going to go, okay, at this point in time, we're going to face a double pot bet on the river. If we check, he's going to double pot with these hands. Does 10-7 work as a particularly good call against that double pot range? That range ends up being flushes and 5-4. 10-7 of diamonds doesn't do a particularly good job against bluff catching against flushes and 5-4. Unblocks 5-4, but it also unblocks flushes, or doesn't block flushes. I think the other way round in ICM, it basically says, okay, so maybe we need slightly more hot and cold equity. So now 10-7 of diamonds isn't quite as good as 10-7 of spades, which is a reverse from Chippy V. But in ICM, like you said, Irk, big blind can go a little bit more crazy on the check to the river line because of ICM. So it can now bluff a bit more. So now the solver's like, but if we check, we're going to face more bets. What are those bets going to look like? Well, he's now going to bluff more. What are the bluffs going to look like? The bluffs actually contain 10x and queen x, and he's value betting queen 10. And so he'll be bluffing with 10x, queen x, but also he won't be value betting as many flushes anymore. That's the key thing. His value bets will just be 10-7, queen 10. So 10-7 now actually blocks way more value. Maybe now, because it blocks more value and will get bluffed more, when you add up all those things, then I think it's possibly why 10-7 of diamonds has come out being a frequent check. I think that's what I'll go with. I think that makes sense. It's kind of interesting. It's crazy interesting. Yeah. Spent quite a long time with this hand now. Is there anything else in this hand you want to look at? Yeah, okay. Look. Any other runouts? Any other spots? Any other patterns? Or anyone else? Anyone else who's watching? I agree that checks more because it's going to be more of a benefit. I just meant that the out of position river bluff hand selection is just based on the value hands one blocks. It just meant that out of position river bluff is just based on the value hands river blocks. So you're saying, oh, okay, I think I know what you're saying. You're saying that in ICM, big blind's only bluffing with the 10x because it knows that. Sorry, you're saying that the big blind is only bluffing these 10-5 of diamonds because it knows that in position's value range consists of a bit more 10-7 of diamonds, a bit more 10-7 suited. That's what you're saying, and because of that, you're also saying that the reason that Chippy V doesn't bluff those hands isn't because it necessarily doesn't want to bluff those hands. It's because why would it bluff 10-5 suited when the 10 doesn't block any value anymore? Yeah, you're correct. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's true. And then I guess the next question is one thing happening before the other. And again, I think it kind of happens at the same time. I think, the solver obviously knows that the river happens after the turn. But say at this point, but yeah, I still think it. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Well, in Chippy V, you just want to block two pairs, I guess. Let's look at Chippy V again. So in Chippy V, where's the core range coming from? No, well, you can't block two pairs. You can't block. You can't use pairs as blockers to bluff because then you got a pair, right? Sorry. Yeah, you can't use pairs to bluff really because then you're just bluffing too high up in your range. So it just uses the absolute bottom of the range and it doesn't try and block. Even though in position has some flushes, it has. It doesn't really look like in position particularly cares. Damn it, I keep doing this wrong. Sorry. It doesn't particularly care about having a spade to bluff, even though that's where the nuts come from. That's where the nuts come from. It's just using the bottom. I'm going to say that in Chippy V, I think at this point, both ranges are so wide, and that in position sort of has... I mean, in position's range at this point is just a bunch of hands somewhere between 25% and 45% equity, right? So a bunch of those hands that have all types of different properties. Some ace high, some low pair, occasional flushes. The ranges are wide, the blockers don't really matter as much. He just bluffs the bottom of the range. Can't block two pairs. But it's interesting that he doesn't try and block flushes, because that's kind of one hand class that you know will call, so you might as well block it. So you might think, why doesn't he try and bluff with, say, well, 10 of spades, or 7 of spades, 6 of hearts? Maybe he does. Doesn't have it in his range, but probably would, maybe. Does he have 6-5? Okay, so the 6-5 with a spade will kind of do it. But it doesn't look particularly... It doesn't look like in Chippy V this guy's particularly trying to block flushes. And then if we go into ICM in the check, yeah. And then go double pot. Yeah, I don't think he's trying to block flushes again, really, despite that fact. In positions range is, once again, just a bunch of hands. In fact, you can actually see in this line, in position has slightly stronger range. He has more hands now. His range is almost all like, basically, between 40 and 45% equity now. Doesn't really have... He does have a couple of 0% equity, I guess. I guess that's always the way. Yeah, interesting. Oh, I asked a little poll. I'm not sure how many votes I got. I got some. Maybe 5. No, it must be more. Must be almost 10 votes. I asked, have you used a Piosolver with the ICM feature before? 57 people said no. Interesting. That's actually, I thought it'd be higher. So people are getting good. Okay, that was interesting. I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to do one more thing here. I'll do it now. This is the ICM. And this is ICM because there's no big betting, just small betting. This is the reaction to the equilibrium c-bet strategy. What is your prediction if we force this? If we force a range bet. What is your prediction? How will out of position react? No problem. Well, I've forced in position to c-bet range. Forced in position to c-bet range. And I'm interested. Not sure it's actually working. But yeah, I want to see what the out of position does to adjust. Why isn't it betting more? What the hell? Let's do it a different way. You think it's just float more? Yeah. I think it's a bit of both. I'm wondering if, with ICM, it actually just skews to more check raising. That's what I'm wondering. That would be my guess, that it would just skew towards aggression. So potentially, again, it's the other way around to Chippy V, where it potentially maybe doesn't even float that much more. It just check raises way more bluffs, would be potentially. I took a picture of the original reaction, so we'll be able to compare. It's originally folding 30%, only 7% or 6.8 check raise, and then calling the rest. But considering it was only betting like 48% or 45% at equilibrium, going to 100% bet, which I mean some people are doing, I think we might see an extreme response. I mean, this is quite volatile how it solves things, but might still give us a nice indication. We'll see. Yeah, I haven't looked either too much, but done a fair amount of post-flop ICM work. I think it's a nice thing to look at, because ICM is kind of always there, isn't it? More or less always there, and that's where the money's to be made, isn't it? Final tables. So and especially post flop as well. I think everyone more or less knows the limitations, or some of the limitations of ICM, and people are at liberty to adjust whichever way they feel like, or as little or as much as they feel like with regards to ICM, if they feel like there's reasons to adjust one way or the other. But when we're talking post-flop, it seems like knowing the effects of what ICM does seems just vital, really. I mean, once again, how can you make a post-flop ICM adjustment if you don't know what the equilibrium is? So I think it's good to see. Yeah, so there's like 5% less folding, which isn't much, but the check raising's more than doubled. And yeah, I would say that's what it looks like. I just think it bluffs more, right? Because I think it's bluffing more because the value, let's just say pocket eights, middle set, it's not pure check raising. So to double the check raise frequency and to keep the bluff value threshold the same, I mean, I would assume that you would need to be pure check raising a set of 8s. Or maybe not, because at equilibrium it's normally calling sets. So actually maybe not. Maybe it isn't bluffing more. Maybe not. Yeah. This is the equilibrium response. There. And now this is what it is. So yeah, it's just going crazy with those overcard gut shots, which it's been very passive with before, but now it's just going crazy with them. And yeah, it's just forcing all the folds from all of the stuff that basically shouldn't have bet in the first place. So these like king 3 of hearts that shouldn't really be betting in the first place, forcing the folds. And it turns out that it appears to show that if you've got a hand like queen jack, getting 100% bet from king 3 of clubs and then forcing them to fold every time is pretty decent. Oh, funnily enough, this is interesting. Sevens is a hand that is basically a pure check back, but it's actually now forcing the bet call, which is really funny. It's forced to bet call sevens now because its strategy is so terrible. Strategy is so terrible, it's betting so much trash. It's now taking a hand that didn't want to put any money on the flop, and it's like, well, damn it, now I've got a pair, I guess I'm going to have to call. That's such a terrible strategy, but it's forcing that to occur. And that's just going to, I mean, it's only one hand, but it's also not pure folding 6s and 5s. And if you've got queen jack, you know, just a gut shot, yeah, it's probably going to work out pretty well for you when people do that. So yeah, probably just a good example of how the equilibrium with a range bet is just going to result in a much higher EV for out of position than at true equilibrium or at Nash equilibrium. People are definitely betting too much, absolutely for sure. I mean, I know I am, which is one reason why I'm looking at this. Yeah. And funnily enough, people are actually probably making quite good intuitive adjustments because it's kind of interesting. People tend not to check raise enough in the big blind, but in ICM, the strategies are generally more passive, so there should be more check calling. But at the same time, people probably still see betting too much in spots like this, making the 7% equilibrium check raise. If people actually end up check raising 14%, they're actually probably doing a pretty good job of adjusting, and they're actually doing it by accident, which is not the only time in poker that people make good adjustments by accident, so it's really funny. Yeah, pretty much solved now. So yeah, folding 5% less. So we're just getting a bit more of these. These are the ones that get added in. I think it's these like king of spades, no pair. You know, king of spades, queen of spades, queen 7 of spades. I think these are folding before. Now they're just being turned into like continues. I believe it's these ones. I'm actually surprised that king queen of hearts would ever fold against that strategy, especially because the strategy involves too much betting from like these hands. So I mean, I think it's much. I think most people would probably be happier check calling king queen of hearts than they would king 7 with the king of spades. I think, could be wrong. So yeah, adjustment relatively intuitive, I guess. Now we're taking things like 10-6. Probably quite easy to see why this just loves being check raised. These sets and top two are still indifferent, which is kind of interesting to me. Kind of indifferent. Yeah, that's kind of interesting to me actually. Yeah, let's look at the Chippy V now. The Chippy V equilibrium. Oh, there's no small bending. Damn it. So yeah, we know that versus the big bet, things look a bit different. That's annoying. I'm not even going to click this because it's Piosolver can't really hack strategies that have 0.00. Interesting. All right, I'm gonna leave it here. ERK. I'm gonna leave it here. I think I'm gonna late reg the Monday 6 Max, and I think I'm gonna stream it on Twitch. I think I'll stream it on Twitch if you want to tune in for that. Maybe check in about half an hour. I'll just late reg the 109 Monday 6 Max. If you're around, I think I'll stream that. But yeah, I just thought I'd do a YouTube stream, see what it's like. Got it working anyway. Yeah, I think it was fun. Thanks for joining me. So I'm gonna leave it there. How do I end the stream on YouTube? Suppose I just click end stream here. Yeah, alright. Cheers.